My sister always played the victim and said, "You're just being mean." So I exposed her manipulative texts to our parents and watched them finally see her true colors. I used to believe that family was meant to be your unshakable support, the people who would love you at your worst, who'd have your back no matter what. But that illusion shattered slowly over the years, in quiet ways at first. It took me years to realize I'd been fooling myself, mainly because I kept thinking that if I ignored the little slights, the quiet guilt trips, the endless drama, they'd eventually just stop. Or at least fade into the background. And then there was my sister, Althea. Delicate, soft-spoken, doe-eyed Althea. A fitting name, I suppose, for someone who could come across as gentle, even frail, to people who didn't know her well. She had a certain way about her, a look of perennial innocence that people instinctively wanted to protect. Our parents adored her, constantly praising her sweet, sensitive nature. They didn't see what I saw, maybe they didn't want to. They had this way of brushing things off with that "we treat both of you equally" line as though it were gospel. "You know, we don't play favorites," my mom would say, patting me on the hand when I dare to express frustration about some unfairness. "Exactly," Dad would add, nodding as if that settled everything. "You girls need to work things out like grown-ups." Well, here's a funny thing about working things out. It doesn't go so well when one person refuses to take any responsibility for anything. Growing up, I was always the rough and tumble one, the one who wasn't afraid to say what I thought, to stick up for myself and others. I scraped my knees, talked back to bullies, and climbed trees like they were my personal playground. Althea, on the other hand, was the picture of innocence, a fragile creature that my parents treated like a Fabergé egg. If I so much as teased her, she'd put on that teary, crestfallen face, and suddenly I'd be the one getting the lecture on kindness. The manipulation started small, in ways I could barely notice at first. Althea had this way of turning everything around so that she'd somehow be the one who was hurt, wronged, abandoned. When we were kids, it was little things, claiming I'd taken her favorite toy when she'd hidden it herself, crying if I refused to give her the last cookie. I was used to it, expected it even, but I was young, and I still thought of her as my little sister who just needed looking after. What I didn't see back then was that Althea was crafting an entire story about me that would haunt me into adulthood. Years passed, and I started pulling away. I was counting down the days to college, desperate for a life that didn't involve being blamed for everything Althea felt went wrong. But then, just when I thought I was free, family pulled me back in. It all began when our mom had a health scare a few years ago. Nothing life-threatening, thank God, but it shook the family to its core. Dad called me, practically begging for my help since I was just a 2-hour drive away in Seattle. I didn't hesitate. I threw some things in a bag and drove home, telling myself that I'd stay as long as I needed to, as long as Mom needed me. What I didn't expect was Althea to suddenly decide that she'd move in with Mom and Dad to help out too. I arrived first, setting up doctor's appointments, running to the pharmacy, organizing meals. My parents were grateful, but in their minds, this was all a joint effort between Althea and me. Even though I was doing most of the work, Althea was the one they lavished praise on. She'd pop her head into the kitchen occasionally to check in with Mom or bring her a glass of water, but then she'd wander back to her room, probably to nap or scroll through Instagram. Yet, whenever she'd make one of her rare appearances, our parents would beam as if she were Florence Nightingale herself. It was late one evening when I finally reached my breaking point. I was in the kitchen, hands deep in soapy water, scrubbing dishes while my dad sat at the table with a newspaper. I hadn't seen Althea all afternoon, but right then she floated in like a ghost, already in her pajamas, her hair tied up, looking every bit like she'd been tending to Mom's every need. "Eden," she said in that soft, sing-song voice she'd perfected over the years, "do you think you could run out and pick up Mom's prescription in the morning?" "I would, but I've been so exhausted lately." Her eyes darted briefly to Dad, who glanced at me over his newspaper, eyebrows raised, waiting for my response. I could feel my blood start to simmer. This was the 5th time in a week she'd handed off something onto me, something she'd promised to take care of, only to somehow end up too tired or too busy at the last minute. "You know, Althea," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I've been taking care of almost everything around here. It would be nice if you could actually follow through on some of these things." Althea's eyes widened, her lips parting slightly as she gave me that look that practically screamed, "How could you be so mean?"
I didn't realize you were feeling that way, Eden," she stammered, her voice so low, so pitiful, that I almost felt guilty for a second.
"Almost. Maybe you should've," I replied, drying my hands and doing my best not to let my irritation show. "I'm not trying to be harsh, Althea, but it'd be helpful if you actually contributed instead of just, showing up when it's convenient." "Girls, come on," Dad interrupted, his voice holding that edge that meant he was trying to stay calm. "There's no need for tension. Althea, maybe Eden's right. You should try to help out more." She looked at Dad, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm doing the best I can. It's so hard sometimes, and Eden's always so critical. I feel like nothing I do is ever enough for her. I swear I almost dropped the dish towel." It was like every time I tried to stand up for myself, she'd turn it around, twist it into some accusation that I was the one being mean, being unsupportive. And there it was, Dad's face softening, his sympathy pouring out in that familiar look as he said, "Eden, maybe ease up a little. You know Althea's trying her best." Trying her best? I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I just stood there, biting back the words, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, and nodded. It wasn't worth it. It was never worth it. After that, things only got worse. Althea continued to float around the house like some martyr, playing up her exhaustion, her sacrifices, and our parents only saw what she wanted them to see. The more I distanced myself, the more she leaned into her role, claiming that I was cold and withdrawn, that I didn't care about family anymore. She'd call me selfish, then retreat to her room, leaving me alone in the kitchen with my jaw clenched and my hands shaking. A few weeks later, after I'd returned to Seattle, I received a text from her. I wasn't expecting it, so when I saw her name pop up on my phone, I almost didn't want to open it. But I did, and there it was, a long, winding message about how she missed the days we were close and how I'd changed since moving away, that I'd abandoned the family and left her to pick up the pieces. She ended it with, "I just wish you'd care about me as much as I care about you." I stared at my phone, feeling the familiar knot forming in my stomach, a heaviness that threatened to pull me under. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I replied. "Althea," I typed, my fingers shaking, "don't pretend like you care about me. You only care about how things look to other people. I'm done letting you twist everything around. I've had it with your guilt trips." For once, she didn't reply right away. But hours later, a new message appeared, not from her, but from Mom. "Eden," it read, "why can't you just be nice to your sister? She's been telling me how you're treating her, and I'm disappointed. Family is everything. I thought you knew that." I felt my chest tighten as I read and reread the message. It didn't matter what I said or did, Althea would always find a way to be the victim, and I'd always be the villain in her story. But this time, I wasn't going to let her win. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I was tired of hiding, of swallowing my voice, of letting her paint me as something I wasn't. This time, I was going to show everyone exactly who Althea was, even if it meant they'd never see me the same way again. After Mom's text, I couldn't focus on anything. I sat there in my apartment, staring at my phone, rereading the words over and over, feeling each one sink like a stone in my stomach. Why can't you just be nice to your sister? The words burned. Althea had crafted this entire narrative around me, that I was the cold, career-obsessed daughter who'd turned her back on family, and it was working. They all believed her. Every tear she cried, every story she spun, it was like a thread she'd woven into a giant web that I couldn't seem to escape. That night, lying awake, I decided I was done. Done letting her rewrite my story, done letting her manipulate everyone around her. I was going to expose her lies, her schemes, everything. And I knew exactly how to do it. The next morning, I started by digging through my phone for all our old text messages. Every backhanded comment, every guilt trip, every time she dumped responsibilities onto me while claiming the credit, I had it all. I spent hours screenshotting our conversations, building a timeline of Althea's manipulations. I couldn't believe the sheer number of texts she'd sent, painting herself as the loving sister while undermining me with passive-aggressive guilt trips. As I read through each message, the whole pattern of her behavior became painfully clear. Her classic moves were always the same. She'd compliment me in one sentence, then slip in a little jab the next. "You're so successful, Eden. I just wish you had a little more time for your family." Or, "It's great that you have your career, but I hope you don't forget the people who love you." There it was, plain as day, in her own words. Then came the real goldmine, the messages she'd sent me during Mom's recovery. Althea had spun a story to our parents about how she'd been taking care of everything, but in these texts, she was asking me to handle appointments, errands, and chores. I had messages where she'd thank me for handling it because she was too exhausted. And yet, she'd turned around and told Mom and Dad she'd done it all. It was unbelievable, seeing the manipulation spelled out so clearly. But I knew screenshots alone wouldn't be enough. My parents were too loyal to Althea's sweet facade, they'd need more than just text evidence. So I called my cousin Lisa, who'd always been more like an older sister to me. She'd seen Althea's manipulations over the years, too, and had tried to warn me before, but I'd brushed it off. I hadn't wanted to believe that my own sister could be so ruthless. "Lisa, I need your help," I said, my voice shaking a little as I told her my plan. Lisa listened quietly, and when I finished, she let out a low whistle. "Finally," she said, sounding relieved. "I've been waiting for you to stand up to her for years, Eden. Whatever you need, I'm here." Together, we came up with a plan. Lisa was going to host a family dinner at her place, a casual gathering with just close family members, our parents, Althea, Lisa, and me. It was perfect because Althea wouldn't suspect a thing. She loved family dinners and would use it as another chance to flaunt her dedication to family while subtly making digs at me. This time, though, she'd be the one caught in her own web. The night of the dinner, I arrived early with Lisa, nervous but determined. I had my screenshots printed out, each message organized with dates and times. Lisa had even created a few printouts with headers like Eden helping with mom's recovery and Althea delegating responsibilities, just to make it as clear as possible. As we were setting up, Lisa gave me a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "Remember, this isn't just about you," she said. "Your parents deserve to know who Althea really is. They've been manipulated, too." My heart was pounding by the time my parents arrived. They hugged me warmly, though I could sense a slight coolness, a hint of disappointment that told me Althea's stories had gotten to them. And then, right on cue, Althea floated in. She was dressed in a soft, pastel-colored dress, her hair perfectly curled, her makeup subtle but flawless. She looked like she'd just stepped out of a magazine spread. "Oh, Eden," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug. "It's so good to see you. I've missed you." Her voice was saccharine sweet, dripping with a warmth that was as fake as it was effective. My parents watched, clearly pleased at the sweet reunion. Althea flashed them a little smile, as if to say, "Look how loving I am, even after everything." Once we were all seated around the table, the dinner started out quietly. Althea took her usual approach, making little comments about how busy I must be, how she hoped I could still find time for family despite my hectic schedule. My parents nodded along sympathetically, and I could feel the anger simmering in my chest. Finally, after dessert, I took a deep breath and looked around the table. "Mom, Dad," I began, "there's something I need to talk to you about. It's about Althea, and the things she's been telling you about me." Althea's face froze for a split second, her smile flickering. But she quickly composed herself, putting on an innocent look. "Eden," she said, her voice a careful mix of confusion and hurt, "what are you talking about?" I ignored her, looking straight at my parents. "Althea's been lying to you for years. She's manipulated every situation to make herself look like the victim, and she's painted me as the bad guy. I've stayed quiet about it, but I can't let her keep twisting things anymore." "Eden, that's a serious accusation," my dad said, looking bewildered. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the way she made you think she was taking care of Mom when she was sick. I have proof that I was the one handling everything. She kept dumping responsibilities on me, then taking credit for it all. I know this might be hard to believe, but I brought something to show you." Before Althea could say another word, I pulled out the stack of screenshots and passed them across the table. My parents looked down at them, flipping through the pages with growing confusion, then shock. I could see the truth slowly sinking in as they read text after text, each one revealing Althea's lies and manipulation in her own words. "Althea?" Mom's voice was small, trembling. "Is this true? Did you lie to us?" Althea's face had turned pale, but she was quick to launch into her next act. She let out a choked sob, covering her face with her hands.
I didn't mean for things to go this far," she whimpered.
I was so stressed. I felt like no one understood how hard things were for me. But this time, her tears didn't work. My parents looked at her, and for the first time, I saw doubt in their eyes. They turned back to me, their faces lined with confusion and guilt.
"Eden," my mom whispered, her voice breaking, I don't know what to say."
"I'm so sorry." I nodded, feeling a bittersweet relief wash over me. "All I ever wanted was to be treated fairly," I said quietly. "I love this family, but I can't keep letting Althea make me the villain just so she can play the victim." Lisa, who had stayed quiet through it all, finally spoke up. "Aunt Helen, Uncle Carl," she said gently, "I think it's time we all start seeing things clearly. Eden's done more for this family than any of us realize, and she deserves to be recognized for it." Althea tried to keep up her act, but her tears dried up as she realized no one was buying it. Her face hardened, and for a moment, I saw the mask slip, the true Althea, angry, resentful, and exposed. After that night, things changed. My parents apologized to me, genuinely, and promised to make it up to me. They finally started seeing Althea's manipulations for what they were, and she lost the power she'd held over them for so long. Althea tried to keep up her loving sister act, but it was too late, the damage was done. Her credibility, her carefully crafted victim image, had shattered in front of the whole family. I'd spent years biting my tongue, letting her walk all over me, but now, I was finally free. And Althea? She'd have to live with the fact that she'd been exposed, her true colors laid bare for everyone to see. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was enough. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I'd won back my own story, and no one could take that from me.